Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Laugh Pig Kitchen. I'm Laura. This is Quarantine Cuisine. We're making barbecued chicken tonight with some mashed potatoes and some sort of green vegetable. I think I've got green peas, I've got green beans, I've got some asparagus, I've got some broccoli. So we'll have that. Some sort of green vegetable. That's very important. We were talking about building up your immune system. The more vegetables, particularly the green ones, that you can get in you, the better off you are. So here's to green vegetables today. But for now, we're going back to our bread making, how we talked about when we were making tortillas, that a lot of our breads we just have gotten out of practice of making because the grocery stores make such great breads that, why make them at home unless you have to? Well, we may be coming to a point where we have to, because breads and things tend to be some of the stuff that's getting snatched up in the grocery store the quickest. So tonight, to go with our chicken and mashed potatoes and something green, I'm going to make some biscuits. There was a time when every single Southern woman worth her salt knew how to make biscuits from scratch. And then came the advent of tubes of Womp biscuits. You unwrapped them, smacked them on the counter, they popped open, you put them in a pan and baked them. What a wonderful convenience, and made things way easier for everybody. I grew up eating a whole lot of Womp biscuits, but I also ate a whole lot of homemade biscuits too. And I learned how to make homemade biscuits. Just like the tortillas, they're not very hard, and I bet you have the stuff at home to make them with. So let's get going. Flour, all-purpose flour again, same thing I've been using. All-purpose flour is what we're going to make our biscuits out of. And I'm going to use 2 cups. 1, 2 of all-purpose flour. If you have self-rising flour, that's awesome, and I bet there's a biscuit recipe on that bag of self-rising flour. The only difference in self-rising flour and all-purpose flour, self-rising flour already has baking powder and salt added to it, which is going to be in our mix, but self-rising flour already has that in it. The only downfall of self-rising flour is that baking powder tends to get bitter and not taste really good after a few months. If you've got a can of baking powder that's been in your pantry for a year and a half or 2 years, it may be worth getting a new one so your product will taste really good. And with self-rising flour, there's no way to know how long that baking powder and that salt has been in that flour, in that bag, on your grocery store shelf. That's the only downfall to self-rising flour, which is why I'm not using it. But it does come in really handy in making it easy to make biscuits and other things that need to have baking powder in them. So there's the story of self-rising flour. All right, I've got my 2 cups of all-purpose flour in here. I've got my sugar. I'm going to put about a teaspoon of sugar in here. If you're worried about sugar, you don't have to, but to me it tempers just the tiny bit of bitterness that the baking powder does give. And you know what? I'm actually going to put 2. I'm going to put 1 teaspoon per cup of all-purpose flour. Again, much like the tortillas, I don't usually measure, so bear with me as I measure to help y'all out, hopefully. Where's my salt? Here's my salt. I'm going to do about, I'm going to do a nice heaping teaspoon of salt in my dry biscuit mix. And 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Now, I'm going to be using regular milk, sweet milk, whole milk, whatever you want to call it, in my biscuits. If you are using buttermilk instead, actually I'm going to do 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. If I was using buttermilk instead of regular whole milk, I would change my mix to 2 teaspoons of baking powder plus 1/2 a teaspoon of baking soda. Because of the acidity in the buttermilk, the baking soda works really well to help lift your biscuits. So that's the only difference that you make if you're using, only change you make if you're using buttermilk, is 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda in there. But since I'm not using buttermilk, I'm using 2.5 teaspoons of just baking powder. All right, that's all of our dry ingredients. Easy peasy, right? Now, here's the trick for you. Most biscuit recipes will tell you, take your butter or your shortening, whatever fat, solid fat they're wanting you to use. We're going to use butter today. And cut it into cubes and then use one of these to mix it into your dry ingredients. Not everybody in the world has one of these, and even if you do, I have tried the whole cube up the butter and then mix it in with this, and it's kind of time consuming, and I don't know. There's an easier way to do it, and if you don't have one of these, you don't have to have one of these, and that's the way I'm going to show you today. Part of the trick is, when you're ready for your butter, you go get it out of your fridge, which is what I'm about to do. You want your butter as cold as it can be, so stay tuned. I'm getting some butter. I'm using unsalted butter today. I usually buy salted butter. Someone had bought all the salted butter at the store and only left the unsalted butter. Most bakers will tell you that it's better to use unsalted butter because it's firmer than salted butter is. But, I'm good either way. And I may just, because we are using unsalted butter and I forgot about that, I'm going to add an extra sprinkle or two of salt into my dry mix to make up for the salt that's not in this butter right here. Here's your other trick. Real cold butter and your handy dandy grater. And you're going to grate this into your dry mix just like if you were grating a little block of cheese into your dry mix. And we're going to use about 2/3 of this stick of butter. I don't know what that measure is, but if you look at the stick of butter and you go, okay, I'll divide it into thirds and I'll grate 2 of those thirds into my dry mix. And I'm going to put the other aside. And look how easy that was. And then put your grater aside. Now, you've got a big pile of what looks almost like mozzarella cheese on top of your dry mix here. Here's another trick. Scoop in with your hand and pull the dry stuff up over the butter. So you're getting the butter all covered with flour. And at that point, just start doing this with your hands. All you're doing is kind of blending those little strips of butter with your flour, and done. That's all you have to do with that. Da, 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 da. It's a miracle. I have a cup of milk, so we're going to see how much of it I need, kind of like we did with the water with the tortillas yesterday. Oh, by the way, we're preheating our oven to 450. We need it pretty hot for biscuits. 450. Okay, that's a little over half a cup of the milk. Let's see where we are. I'm just grabbing a regular spoon and stirring around, and we're not too far off. I don't know that we're going to need that entire cup of milk, but we're going to need a little bit more. Let's see if we get to there's about a 1/4 cup left in there. So I've used about 3/4 of a cup of milk in this little mix. Let's see how we're doing. It's going to be kind of a raggedy mix that does not look like it's going to come together and become biscuits at all right now. And there comes a point where it gets hard to stir with your spoon. It's time to get your hands in it. All right, just because I know what the biscuit dough is supposed to feel like, it's still a little bit stiff, so I'm going to add a tiny bit more. So there's a little less than 1/4 of a cup of milk left in there, and I think that's going to do the trick for us because I want a pretty soft dough. And I'm going to add some more flour to my work surface here that's going to allow any extra milk in there to soak in. All right, it's a big raggedy mess right now. And I'm dumping it out onto my work surface out of the bowl. And here's your little trick. Another little trick for biscuits. You kind of start kneading it and mashing it. You're not going to want to work biscuits a whole lot or they're going to become tough. My little trick, sprinkle a little flour on it so it doesn't stick all over the work surface. And as it begins coming together, You fold it, mash it, fold it, mash it. Put a little bit more flour if it's still sticky. Mine's still a little bit sticky, so we don't want it sticking all over everything. Mash it, fold it, mash it, fold it, mash it, fold it. If it needs a little more flour to keep it moving, sprinkle a little more flour on there. There we go. Mash it, fold it, and eventually, in just a few folds, your mixture has come together beautifully. It's a nice solid dough now, and it begins to bounce back against your hand a little bit. That's your sign that you've gotten it mixed up good. If you keep mashing a whole lot more on it, it's going to get a little tough because you're developing that gluten in there that makes bread so nice and chewy and sticks together well. With biscuits, you don't want to develop that a whole lot because you don't want a tough biscuit. Everybody wants a nice, flaky, soft biscuit. So that's what we're aiming for. Okay, I'm hoping you can see what I'm working with here. See, I've just got my dough nice and mashed out there. Now, it's time for you to decide what size biscuits do I want, how big around, and how tall do I want my biscuits to be. Because if you look at how tall your dough is here, when you bake it, if we've mixed them up right, they're going to about double. So if you've got a 1/2 inch, I probably got about a 1/2 inch here, that should get me about 1 inch tall biscuits. That's about what we like here in our house. Now, what are you going to cut your biscuits with? Let me wash some of this stuff off my hands so I can keep working without looking like I have paste all over my hands. Towel, there. Okay. I have this handy dandy set of circular cutters. So I get to choose whatever size biscuit I want. My mother, my grandmother, most of my aunts and stuff that I had would use either a jelly jar, a juice glass, a cleaned out tin can. Just about anything can suffice for a biscuit cutter. So whatever you use what you got, where you got it. Here's a trick. Dip your cutter into some flour. That's handy. And when you cut your biscuits, cut them with a purpose. Don't just, down real slow. I don't want to do it too fast. You're going to pinch the edges of your biscuit together, and then they're not going to rise. Let me show you. So I just went straight down, no twisting. You don't twist, just straight down. And then the biscuit pops right out. That's what you want your biscuit to look like. You don't want them, the edges being pinched and all, because when it cooks, those edges are going to stay pinched and you're going to end up with a crooked biscuit. So here's what we want. Onto a baking sheet it goes. And I have a piece of parchment paper on my baking sheet so my biscuits won't stick. So we cut our biscuits out. See, there's another one. Isn't that lovely? So cut all your biscuits out. When you get them cut out, you're going to have a significant amount of dough left. And we're going to do the same thing that we were doing with it before. You mash it together, fold it, press it, fold it, press it a couple of times, and then you've got another smaller thing of dough to make a few more biscuits out of. There's no need to waste any of that dough. Some of your very last biscuits that you make probably aren't going to come out quite as aesthetically pleasing as your first group did, but they're still going to taste just the same. Now, I've got an oven heated to 450 degrees. I have a little bit of milk left over, so here's another hint. Either a little bit of milk, or if you have a little bit of heavy cream, or if you have a little bit of melted butter. That's just a little tiny bit of extra liquid, extra fat that can give you a nice little golden top crust on your biscuits. There it is. They're going to go in the oven for about 12 to 14 minutes. Now that's my oven. You know your oven. You just kind of have to keep an eye on them to begin with until you figure out exactly how your oven likes to bake biscuits. If it's fast, if it's slow, or what. But start out with 12 to 14 minutes. Take a look at them and see how they're doing. And wonder of wonders, there's biscuits in my oven already. Looky there. So here is what it's going to look like when it's done. Look at that beautiful golden crust. I hope you can see some of the flakes, some of these are the layers that you make when you fold and mash, fold and mash. You're making layer after layer of buttery biscuit goodness that everybody in your house is going to go, oh, you're brilliant. You are a brilliant biscuit maker. Look at you. So good luck. If you guys make some biscuits, share some pictures with me and let me know how you did with them. Godspeed. Hope everybody's great today. A little hello to Cindy and Mark Trammell. Cindy reached out to me. I've known them since I was a little tiny child, and they're awesome people. And thanks for saying hi, guys, and thanks for giving me some good feedback on the channel. Everybody have a fantastic evening. We'll catch up with you again. This is the Laugh Pig Kitchen. We're out.